Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard podcast. On this episode, going to be talking about the Pacers rebuild slash retool. It looks like they are entering what I think they should do, what they should be looking for, as well as like rebuilding philosophy overall. What should you be looking for in a trade package when you do have to kind of give up on a star player or a star player demands a trade. If you do end up liking the video, please give us a like. Helps us out a lot. Also, subscribe for weekly content. And if there's a spot that you disagree with, throw a comment in the comment section. If there's anything you'd like me to discuss in a future episode, let me know in the comment section. We'd love to discuss it with you down there. All right. So Indiana, last week or 2 weeks ago, I can't remember now. All my weeks are gelling together. End up announcing that they're shopping Caris LeVert and one of either Miles Turner or Domantas Sabonis. I remember at the time thinking that was really dumb to not commit to one of those guys because, from either of their perspective, I'm sure both think that they're better than the other, but I think most people would agree that Sabonis is overall the better player. And from his perspective, he's like, well, what the hell? Like, you guys aren't willing to commit to me. You don't think I'm better than him? Like, forget that. And sure enough, that's what happened. So Sabonis ends up demanding a trade. So it's dumb to make this public. This is sounding like Rick Carlisle all over again. I discussed him a lot in the prior episodes. So it sounds like he's back to his old ways, like not committing to players and kind of making things tough on them. So unsurprisingly, Sabonis asks out. I guess the message they sent that like they don't really have a preference on whether they have Sabonis or Turner, and they don't see any difference between the two. I think probably both of them view that as a slap in the face, particularly Sabonis in this case. This is a team, they don't have a star player, like a true star player. Sabonis is very good, but he's not like a franchise carrying player or can't really be the face of a championship team, at least in my opinion. But, they've got up to a rough start this year. They've been just completely hammered by the injury bug. And, we've seen them in the playoffs. They were the fourth seed during the bubble year, got swept by the Heat, but they didn't have Sabonis in that series. So we've really not seen this team together on the court. TJ Warren has been out all year with a foot injury. Looks like he'll be out for another month. That's scary. The foot injury stuff for basketball players. Never like to see that. Duarte has looked really good for them in the games that I've seen, at least. It looks like he can do a lot more than kind of at least what was pitched to me. I didn't watch a ton of Oregon basketball last year. I've got to be completely honest there. But kind of, in the draft previews and everything, everybody's like, this guy's a 3-and-D player. Like, he's not going to be able to do much else. Turns out he can go off the dribble. He can hit some pull-up jumpers. Like, looks like he can do a lot more than kind of what was stated or what people kind of thought. So as a rookie, that's really exciting. It sounds like they are wanting to retool, but I think if you're getting rid of Sabonis, if they do end up listening to his wishes and shipping him off, I think it's a rebuild. I'm sorry. There's not a lot here to get excited about. And I don't think in a Sabonis trade, you're going to get back a player who's really going to change the kind of the trajectory of your franchise or like really move the needle at all for you. So Brogdon is kind of stuck here. He's here for the entire season after signing the extension he did in the offseason. He just turned 29. So I think in the offseason, if they do end up blowing this thing up and having a fire sale, I think he's a guy that some teams would really like to get their hands on. Kind of scores at all three levels. He's a good guard, good size, plays decent defense. He's just all around pretty solid. Duarte turns 25 in June. So I mentioned him as a rookie. He's a very old rookie. So he's not super young. I still think you can kind of build things around him in the meantime. But as far as him being the face of a championship team, that's probably not going to be the case for him. So you can kind of build things around him in the meantime and make that work. But long-term wise, I think he's probably an overqualified role player or maybe like a sixth man, fourth, fifth option for like a championship team when he's done developing, which is a solid player, but I don't think he's going to really move the needle on what your franchise can do. Kind of like I mentioned with Brogdon. Well, Brogdon's a little bit different. Brogdon could, as a third option, I think could be a really solid piece for like a really good team. Yeah, I mentioned TJ Warren. I think they're going to have trouble moving him, but I think it's important that they do. He's 28, so, in the prime of his career, but the foot injury stuff is scary. But the most important part for Indiana is he's on an expiring contract. So if they are going to rebuild, you can re-sign him, but if you're going to rebuild, like, you need to capitalize on that value and get something out of it. Torrey Craig has 2 years, 10 million left on his deal, so about 5 million a year. Maybe you can get a second round pick for him. Probably not. He's probably there to stay. McConnell, 4 years, 8 million-ish. You can maybe swap him out for Kemba if you just want to get out of the money. Or you can keep him. He's a solid point guard. I think you aren't going to be embarrassed to have him out there, even if he has to start, in a rebuilding project. LeVert, 2 years, 18 mil a year. He's 27, so I think you can pick something up for him. I think the Lakers should be interested in this, and maybe if the Pacers would like to get Horton Tucker and Kendrick Nunn back, particularly Horton Tucker, Kendrick Nunn, just to make the salaries match, maybe that works. Maybe the Nets, if they want to do a reunion with him, you could swap Joe Harris if you want to give up some picks if you're the Nets. Philly might want him in exchange for like some type of Simmons thing, but I think you're going to have to get a third team involved to give Philly something else, because I doubt Philly wants either Turner or Sabonis back in a Ben Simmons deal with the Embiid thing. They've already had a paint clogging wing, and Ben Simmons, a guy who can't shoot. I don't think they want another center to play along Joel Embiid. The Clippers could maybe do something with Eric Bledsoe. But they don't have a ton of picks, so I really doubt that they're going to be interested in that. Overall, I think it's going to be tough to move LeVert. He's had some injuries, and he's not having a good year this year. He's down from about 20 a game to about 16 a game this year. Some of that's the free throw attempt stuff. Some of it, he's just not shooting as well. So it might be a little tough to move him, but maybe they can get something out of him, maybe a protected first. I don't know, maybe a young player. I mean, if the Lakers, and it looks like they should be, if they are really desperate, I think Horton Tucker is about as good as you can expect in return for something like that. Miles Turner is only 25. I can't believe that. It feels like he's been in the league for 10 years. 2 years, about 18 million a year left on that deal. He's an obvious fit for any team without a center, an athletic 3-point shooting center who is a league leading shot blocker. He can do some rim running stuff. The Warriors, they make a ton of sense. You could do like a Wiseman, Moody, Kevon Looney thing. Boston should be really wanting either him or Sabonis. But I just can't see them, putting together the pieces to really make a run at one of these guys. I think there's going to be better offers on the table than what Boston can offer, at least player-wise. Now, if they want to throw just a crap ton of, draft picks at him and throw like Marcus Smart out there, maybe you can make that work. But I think Marcus Smart's contract, the years that are on it is going to make it really tough to move him. So I could see that working. You've got Josh Richardson, Schroeder, and picks. That could also work. So, aside from Marcus Smart, they can do that. I've heard some New York Knicks stuff. I can't believe that. It seems like they'd want to, kind of keep Mitchell Robinson around, but I guess they don't feel strongly about him. You could do Kemba Walker, Robinson, Toppin, for and maybe a pick. I doubt you'd want to give up a pick. Dallas could do a Porzingis trade if you maybe want to, if you're Indiana and you maybe just want to give the Porzingis thing a try. Could do Turner and Lamb or McConnell or Sabonis if Dallas is willing to throw in picks. I think Dallas is probably throwing in picks regardless for either of these deals. I think Charlotte should be interested in this. I think they really need an upgrade at center there. PJ Washington is fine, but I think either Miles Turner or Sabonis could be really great fits for them. They've got Oubre's contract and they've got enough wing depth that I think they would be able to survive without Oubre. You could throw in, you'd have to throw in Plumlee just for salary. Kai Jones is a guy you could throw in, to a deal and maybe a pick if you have to. Portland should be interested, but I couldn't find a realistic way for them to match salaries without like just throwing in a ton of draft picks. I don't think they're wanting to do that. If Indiana feels some way about Marvin Bagley, Sacramento has a deal here. I've seen San Antonio mentioned for Sabonis. They've got a lot of ways to make deals work, at least numbers wise, money wise. I doubt they're throwing DeJounte Murray into anything. So it's probably going to take picks or maybe, some of the young assets, but I just don't see Indiana interested in many of those. Josh Primo's barely played this year, so maybe you can ship him off instead of a pick. I don't know. He was projected as a second rounder. I still couldn't believe they took him where they did. But I don't think they have the real enticing young asset to make a non-asset based trade work. I think it had to be a pick based trade. Kind of the same teams I mentioned are going to be interested in Sabonis. He's also 25, which is still crazy to me. It seems like he's been in the league a long time too. He's at 3 years, about 20-ish million for his contract. As far as the differences between the two, I kind of mentioned Sabonis being an overall better player, and I think he is. He's a monster post scorer. He's not as much of a defensive force, to put it mildly, as Turner, but I don't think he's a complete liability on that end either. He's just kind of, you're not excited about him defensively, but I don't think he's killing you either. Good playmaker, like good passer out of the post. A couple years ago, maybe it was last year, I think he was nearing 7 assists for the year. This year, those numbers are a bit down, at least, assist wise, but he still got the skill to do it. I think this year is maybe just less opportunities. He can make a three here and there, but not to the level that Turner can. You're not going to rely on his 3-point shooting, but he is somebody that you could kind of build an offense around, somebody you can kind of build the team around as like a foundational piece, a fulcrum for the offense. He's not going to be well suited as like a role player. But he can't be the number one option. You're not going anywhere with him as the number one option. We've seen that played out in Indiana. You're kind of a middle of the road playoff team at best if you have a really competent roster around him. Like, Indiana's got a lot of good players. It's just none of them are great. And that's kind of where Sabonis is. If he's a 2 option, I think you're okay. If he's your 3rd option, like, you are doing very well, and he can be kind of a centerpiece, someone who you can run the offense through. Turner, on the other hand, I think more teams are going to be interested in, but he is not as well suited to be like a foundational piece of your offense and like a real focal point. He's like a super role player, though. He's like everything you would want in like a role player center. Like, shoots the 3, he can rim run, he plays phenomenal defense. So it kind of depends on what you're interested in. If you're wanting to trade for one of these two, if you're a team where you like what you have, you feel really confident about, the way your offense is running and kind of how you're running, it, the players that you're running it through. Turner's a guy who can fit in pretty easily. Brook Lopez is kind of a guy who you can, like a rich man's Brook Lopez. For Milwaukee, Lopez shoots 3s. He can do some post scoring, but you don't really rely on him for that anymore at this stage in his career. And he blocks shots. Turner blocks shots at a higher rate. He's more athletic. He's a better defensive player, maybe not a better shooter, but he's at least comparable to Brook Lopez. So, he's a guy who's going to be able to fit in a lot easier. Whereas Sabonis, you're going to have to work him in. You're going to have to build, something around him to use him most effectively. So if you're looking to just get a straight up talent upgrade, like, Sabonis is your guy. If you're looking for somebody to kind of gel everything together, improve your team defensively, and you don't really want to upset the flow of your offense too much, that'd be Turner. So What are they worth kind of in a vacuum? I think both are kind of worth around the same. I think you'd rather have Sabonis if you're starting a team from scratch, but a lot of teams kind of like what they're doing and everybody's kind of in the mix this year. So maybe some teams aren't willing to kind of upset the flow of things. And, Brian Windhorst, I saw reported yesterday, there's not been a lot of interest in Sabonis for whatever reason. I just think Turner's skill set is going to be more desirable than Sabonis, even though he's not like a franchise cornerstone like Sabonis could be. So I think in a picks-based scenario, you're maybe looking at 2 unprotected firsts and maybe a swap in there. If you throw some players in there, I think you're likely looking at maybe 1 first. Maybe it's protected depending on the players that are in it. Maybe it's unprotected if they're less desirable young pieces, and then maybe an additional swap in there. So just in general, this kind of brought up something interesting. What if you're rebuilding? What should teams be looking to do when they, that star player demands a trade, or it's kind of just time to reset the deck? What should you be trying to do? Should you be trying to get young players, young assets who are already in the league and have done something, or should you just go for as many draft picks as you can get as many, ping pong balls and as many rolls of the dice on the NBA draft as you can get? I think you always take the young players. I'm not saying when San Antonio had to trade Kawhi Leonard, I'm not saying you do the DeMar DeRozan thing to where you're just like hanging on to a playoff spot just barely. Like you never want to do the trade where you're getting 75 cents on the dollar. But I think you would rather have proven young assets in a deal, sort of what the Pelicans did for Anthony Davis, except they didn't really capitalize on it all, which I've talked about ad nauseum at this stage. But something like that. I think you always want to take the proven young players, or at least players that have shown something in the league, rather than just rolling the dice on the ping pong balls to fall your way, which they don't always do in the draft lottery. And then B, you're also rolling the dice on the fact that the NBA draft is super unreliable. I talked about in my draft video, my Cade Cunningham video, very early into the season, the number 1 and number 2 pick, they're rarely, if ever, both really great NBA players. There's usually one that's really good and one that is, average at best. So even if you're getting one of the top 2 picks, you're still, it's a 50-50 chance at best that you're getting the best player. But I understand, a lot of GMs, I understand them taking the picks based package. I think the owners have been sold a false bill of goods here, in terms of the pick based packages. But if you're a GM, you trade that star player and things are looking really bleak, but you can go to your owner and you're like, hey, look at all these great draft picks we have. Look at all these draft picks. When we get these guys in here, when we are able to make these selections or make trades during the draft, we're going to be great. And so it buys the GM more time to kind of, more job security, because, now the owner feels like, hey, I've got to give this guy a chance to make those draft selections or capitalize on those assets, whether, you end up trading those picks. So I don't think that that's the way to go. And I kind of looked at, just a very brief glimpse into, some of the types of trades that teams have made when that star player or when it's time to rebuild. So I think the most prominent example is obviously the process in Philadelphia. So just, as they were kind of a middling playoff team, kind of heading into, their total rebuild. So they were an 8th seed the final year they made the playoffs. They made it to the second round. The Bulls that year were kind of injured. Derrick Rose was out, so they end up beating the Bulls, make it to the second round, can't get past the Celtics. They trade for Bynum in that offseason, and he never really plays for them. So they give up Iguodala, who was their franchise player at the time, to make that deal work and get Bynum in the building. He's just kind of injured, and for a whole variety of reasons, he never really pans out for them, to put it mildly. So they were kind of forced into a full teardown. But the teardown that they made was completely epic. So basically, when they started the process, they were like, we're going to be as bad as possible, for the foreseeable future. That way we can get top draft picks, we get the top assets in here, and we've got everyone in house. So it was designed to kind of keep you from being a mediocre team, like a mid-tier playoff team or below. Was what it was supposed to keep you away from. You're supposed to be either like one of the top teams in the league or one of the worst. Well, here we are, and maybe it's unfair, but they're a mid-tier playoff team right now. They're probably looking at a 4th seed at best this season. And honestly, I think getting a 4th seed this year would be kind of a stretch for them. It's not a team with championship aspirations. And I know the Simmons situation is kind of unique, but that's really all they have to show for it. After all that losing and all of those draft picks, Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid are really all they have to show for it. I guess Tobias Harris, because they cashed in some of those assets, and even the Embiid thing, the injury history he had, it could have very easily not worked out the way that it did. He missed his first 2 years in the league, basically, and we were wondering if he would ever play. We've seen a lot of cases like that where the guy just never gets healthy, and fortunately he did. So then you'd be looking at basically just Ben Simmons, which where would you be then? So yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to give them too much credit for that, but some good players did pass through during the process. Nerlens Noel is okay. Jeremy Grant, pretty good player. Rashawn Holmes, Dario Saric, TJ McConnell, Robert Covington. Very few ever did anything for Philadelphia, but they did pass through the building, I guess. The best example I could find of like recently of the kind of the picks-based package working out was when the Celtics traded Garnett, Pierce, and Jason Terry to the Brooklyn Nets. The Celtics ended up getting Tatum, Brown, and the pick that became Colin Sexton that they ended up trading to Cleveland to get Kyrie. But the biggest difference between that and like the situation Indiana is in is Garnett, Pierce, and Terry in particular were all in the back half of their career. Their best years were behind them. It was clear, they had been making the playoffs, the Celtics, but every year they had been doing a little bit worse during that era. They won the championship in 2008, I think, 2009, something like that, 2008. Every year since then, they had just done like a little bit worse. The injuries had piled up, particularly on Garnett, and it just kind of wasn't moving in the right direction. Sabonis and Turner, 25 years old each, like their best years are in front of them in all likelihood. They could still easily develop. So, trading those old players and then having those picks come through way down the line when, none of those guys were on the team anymore. And, for, I think Garnett may have even been out of the league or, it was close. They were bordering retirement by the time, Boston was taking those draft picks. So I think that was a little bit of a different situation. We have a couple of recent examples, like really recent examples of teams taking pick-based packages. The Rockets traded Harden last year. So they have the Nets picks for 2024 and 2026 remaining from that deal. They also have a Bucks pick this year. So, 2026 is maybe the only pick that might be pretty good. I think 2024, I still think the Nets are going to be pretty solid, at least a playoff team. And they have swaps in 2023, 2025, 2027. So again, maybe 2025 are good and probably 2027 is going to be a pretty solid pick. So I guess you get 2 decent draft picks out of that, 3 at the most. That's not a lot for James Harden. It's just not. The player they got back in that deal, the main player was Victor Oladipo, and they traded him for a pick swap this year with the Heat and 2 expiring contracts. So not good. Not a lot of haul for James Harden there. You're basically got, 2 okay draft picks at worst and, one probably pretty good one, but still, like, you're still rolling the dice on the draft, and you've only got really 3 chances at most there. The Pelicans also did something when they did a picks based package when they traded for Drew Holiday to the Milwaukee Bucks. So the picks left in that deal, they've got swaps. They've got the 2024 pick, swap in 2025, pick in 2026, and the swap for the 2027. So, unfortunately for them, they kind of gambled on Giannis leaving. That was a hell of a gamble to take, because he ends up re-signing the extension. And guess what? Giannis is only going to be 32, 33 years old during that last pick. So good luck with that. All of those picks are probably going to be, low lottery at best. Probably not even. Milwaukee looks like they're set to compete for championships here for at least a couple more years. And, yeah, I just don't see it. I think Giannis will still be awesome at 32, 33 years old. So an example of a players-based package. The Pacers have been here before, actually. Paul George, he demands a trade and wants to go to Los Angeles, specifically the Lakers. So the Pacers swap him for Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis. So it really worked out well for them there. Oladipo was an awesome player before his injury, all-star level guy. Sabonis has made an all-star level or an all-star team, so he's an all-star level guy. So I think they did about as good as you can do. And honestly, if Oladipo doesn't have like those really horrible injuries, maybe we're not even talking about a rebuild at this stage for Indiana. So I think they did about as good as they could have. But, let's say that Indiana decided to go with the picks-based package instead of the player-based one that they got when they traded Paul George, just to kind of reiterate the decision that they made. Also, obviously the Thunder would have been better if they would have had Sabonis. I don't think, salary wise, they could have made keeping Oladipo, getting Paul George, and, just keeping Oladipo, trading Paul George. I don't think salary wise they could have made it work. So I'm just going to kind of Thanos snap Sabonis and Oladipo out of existence. They're off the team. So I think it's debatable whether you could have gotten 3 firsts for Paul George at that time, just because he was so adamant about playing for the Lakers. It really killed his trade value. But just to really hammer home the point, we'll give them 3 first-round picks unprotected for Paul George. So 2018 draft, around the place that Indiana would have been picking with that Oklahoma City pick, you're looking at Grayson Allen, Anthony Simons, Landry Shamet. That's pretty tough. Those are good players. There were some players who have not panned out at all. They're solid, some of them even solid starters, but nothing that's going to really change the trajectory of your franchise. Nothing that's going to keep you from picking in the lottery every year. 2020, you're looking at Tyrese Maxey, RJ Hampton, Emmanuel Quickley, someone in that range. You're talking late 20 picks, in the 20s. You're just not getting a real franchise-changing player at that level. So, Oklahoma City remains solid for most of this time. And when you're trading them a star player, that's typically what's going to happen. The 2022 pick actually is looking like it would have been pretty good. So they're getting one shot, one bite at the apple here to get a real franchise-changing player. And that's kind of what happens when you trade for all these draft picks and all these swaps. Like, when you're giving a team your star player, they're going to be solid. They're going to be a pretty good team. So it's important to get back something. That way you can at least point like, hey, we got this guy. Like, this guy's pretty good. Like, just taking these picks and banking on the lottery ping pong balls and hoping that you select the right guy. It's such a gamble. I would rather take something, that's a sure thing rather than taking a chance. You could get, there's some good young players out there who are struggling to find playing time on a contending team. those are the guys you want to be targeting. Gives you some form of hope, going forward into the future. And when you're trading your star player, you're going to be horrible anyway. So you're probably getting draft picks that way. So, hopefully Indiana makes the right decision. I enjoy kind of the rivalry between them and the Knicks and them and the Heat. So I like to keep them, as a competently run team. But it looks like if they're having to tear this thing completely down to the ground, it looks like it's going to be rough for a couple of years at least for them.